Welcome to this week's edition of Scout's Eye on College Football. Actually, we do it more than once a week, but welcome to the latest edition of Scout's Eye on College Football, part of the Landry Football Podcast Network. Also, you can hear us on the Big Game College Football Streaming Network, where you can find America's best independent college football podcast. So we're here to break down the world of college football, and a lot to get to in the week that was in week 9 to get through the film and get you some thoughts, initial thoughts about what happened in the week, and get you ready, obviously, for Tuesday night's initial playoff rankings, which everyone is hand-wringing on. They're important. They set the early stage of what's going on, but it really doesn't tell you everything that you need to know. It doesn't tell us what is the real key factors going into. Look, there's a lot of football left to be played. We don't know what's going to happen. So let's just kind of just keep it calm and let's take a look at things and how things play out. We're going to go through a number of them. Initial thoughts, a couple of things, and I tend to kind of go through as I watch the games live, some initial thoughts. Reminder that we're going to get into some thoughts on the Auburn situation, the Auburn coaching situation, and who's really a candidate, who's not. But certainly in what the timing was all about, how that played out. But in the early stages, a couple of things jumped out at me. Was Syracuse not as good as we thought at the beginning of the year, and like most people, I felt like they were very much overrated. That was a factor in them getting exposed last week against Clemson, but played very well, losing to Notre Dame. The big storyline in the early window was Ohio State's performance against Penn State. Hearing a lot of pushback on, well, Ohio State's not very good, didn't play very well. Here's the thing about evaluating teams. You can look at style points, and I realize a lot of fans and a lot of media do this. Style points, how many points you win by, and the common opponents. Folks, when you play, where you play, a lot of things factor in. You never stay the same. Ohio State is one of the best teams in the country. They look to be one of the best teams in the country because they're well balanced. They're good on defense. JTT had a tremendous breakout game, but they can get off the field defensively. Offensively, they've not played as sharp as I think they're capable of doing. And a lot of the flavor of the month is Tennessee. And that's the benchmark. Well, they're scoring 1,000,000 points. You're not as good. People intoxicated by offense. Ohio State's very good, folks. Penn State, no, they didn't get beat to the pulp like they did against Michigan, but we kind of warn you with that. It's a different matchup. It's a different style of matchup. Michigan's the more physical, pounding team. They're gonna absolutely kill Penn State, and they did. That's just what they do. Penn State is built a little bit more finesse, speed, more of what Ohio State is. So they're going to match up a little bit better, but certainly not a whole lot there. TCU, not a whole lot of problem except for the first quarter against West Virginia. This TCU team is a good team. I don't think they're great. I keep saying that they're not going to go unbeaten, but that's the watch as we're getting into November. 1 week, next week, is somebody gonna beat them? Is somebody gonna spoil their unbeaten season? They don't look like a great team, but their resume is pretty good. Very good looking team. Florida, Georgia is what we expected. Georgia controlled the game for the most part. People have said, well, they didn't dominate. Florida got back in a little bit. Remember that Georgia is not the type of team that focuses on exploding. They like to wear you down. They're physical, and they're a little bit conservative with the lead. So I don't think that you should look a whole lot into that. More on Georgia as we get into Tennessee and that big matchup this week. Illinois continues to take care of business. May not be overly impressive, but still good-looking team. Defensively, very underrated. Very good team. Oklahoma State, Kansas State. I would say, what the hell happened, Oklahoma State, in that matchup? where they were not even competitive. That doesn't even make any sense how that game played out. Kansas State, good team, ran the football. Oklahoma State, not even competitive. I mean, this could have been an FCS, middle of the pack FCS school that could have given a better fight. I just, that's one of them you scratch your head and say, what is going on? I mean, what happens there, Mike? I mean, how do you absolutely get annihilated in that game? That and the Wake Forest 8 turnovers in the quarter were the two most unbelievable things I have seen. It may be this year in college football, certainly last week. Oregon continues to roll, playing well, folks. You want to define a team by how they looked week one, go for it. That's what you're about, go for it. But I think you need to understand that teams get better, teams get worse. This Oregon team is playing as good or better than anybody in the Pac-12, and they're a really good team. We'll see how it progresses, and we'll see what happens going forward. But they're really good, and they deserve a lot of credit. Bo Nix deserves a lot of credit as well. Didn't we tell you about South Carolina? Not a very good team, ranked in the top 25 was comical. I know that there's sometimes difficulty getting 25 teams in there. South Carolina is not very good, and they're not very well coached. And Missouri, a team that, quite frankly, is not very good and not very well coached, handled them in South Carolina. South Carolina doesn't beat Kentucky if Will Levis is there. This is a team that really hasn't looked very good despite their record and some of the hype that's gone with it. Tennessee. What can you say about Tennessee that hadn't been said already? I'm going to say it into what I see is this Tennessee team has managed to show maturity, to show consistency. They have answered the bell every time, and I think they deserve a lot of credit for that. It's a lot of the things that they do offensively, schematically. It's a lot of the things that they do from a matchup situation where they take players and put them in a position to be successful, and they make you wrong defensively. They make you declare, and they'll run the football when the numbers say to run it, and they'll throw it when the numbers say to throw it. It's a really good system. They do a very good job with it. It's going to be a hellacious matchup. We're going to get into that more in our breakdowns later this week. Georgia, Tennessee. USC just takes care of business against Arizona. Ole Miss handles A&M. Lane Kiffin, a lot of talk about Lane Kiffin and where he may or may not go. More on that in a second. Texas A&M saw some improvement with obviously the quarterback that's very talented, and Connor Wegman's got a lot of ability. But there again, it's more of the, well, look out, we're young. Yeah, A&M is young. I've heard that discussed. Well, they're young and look out. Haven't we heard that before, though? In year 6, if you're young because you choose to be young. Transfer portal, how you develop players. Georgia's young, and they're winning at a high level. Other teams are young. You look around the league that they're in at A&M, and let's just call it like it is. There's better coaching being done around the league by the likes of Brian Kelly and Kirby Smart and Josh Heupel. And look, I mean, there's a lot that needs to be learned and adjusted to by this A&M coaching staff, Jimbo Fisher. I wonder, though, if this may not be, in a weird way, a good thing that's happening to A&M. And here's what I mean by that. There's a lot of talk about, well, they're not going to fire him. They owe him $86 million. That's true. They do, and they won't fire him. If this was another 8-4 season, they could sell you, or they would sell the Aggies fan base into, look, we're young. We're just almost there. We're close. We're right. We're coming. this has been such a colossal failure this year that it is going to force Jimbo, who has an ego like most coaches, to say, this is really bad. This really shakes you to the core, to the point where even though you don't want to make changes, you're going to make them. I think he's going to be, no one's going to force him to do it. He's going to force himself to do it, because it becomes an embarrassing situation for him to deal with. So those are my thoughts on it's so bad that it's going to force some changes that maybe wouldn't have been forced if it was just a little bit bad. Kind of what did I learn? Ohio State's got more game changers than any team in the country. Oklahoma State, again, collapses when it looks like they're good again. I think there's a tremendous talent gap between Ohio State and I think the rest of the Big Ten, with the exception of Michigan. And I think there's a lot more speed with Ohio State than Michigan. An early peak to that game. But JTT was phenomenal, as I mentioned. CJ Stroud didn't play a great game, but he has been really good. Look, I thought he played well in stretches. Marvin Harrison Jr. is, I think, as good a receiver as there is in college football. They didn't play very well by their standards. And they staged a fourth quarter comeback. And this is not an awful Penn State's team, and they dominated them. While they may not have played a tough schedule, and while they may have not played their best game, Ohio State's best game is as good or better than anybody's in the country. Other thoughts, good win by Louisville. No question, getting that win was very impressive against Wake. Again, the Wake situation was incredible to see 8 turnovers that quickly. Is it a win for Louisville and Scott Satterfield that's going to save his job? Maybe that's a place where maybe you can buy another year, because even though he may not be the answer, and even though they underachieved this year, they don't want to spend that type of money on making the replacement. I think this might be able to do it. This is folks, this is the first team in at least 15 years in college football that turned it over 8 times in a single half. That's what Wake did. And they don't turn the football over. It's incredible. Incredible. How about Boston College losing to Connecticut? What a disastrous season that is. You're talking about the best quarterback play this year in college football. Everyone's going to go to Hendon Hooker. People will go to other folks. No one has played better and done more to help his team be successful than Drake May at North Carolina. I mean, there are other good, talented quarterbacks around the country. This guy is carrying his team. 42-24. The defenses, look, they're managing things a little better. It's a 5-star kid. North Carolina is 7-1. They're 2 games up on everyone in the Coastal. Their defense is anywhere from awful to bad to suspect when they're good. There is no question he's the most valuable player in college football, because you can't be the most valuable if your team is, 2-5. You're 7-1 and you don't have a whole lot. That's just incredible. Caleb Williams, Quinn Ewers, J.J. McCarthy, Hendon Hooker. May is really, really good. How about BYU in East Carolina? How they struggled late in that game. Pass interference, 4th and 8 to put the Pirates in the field goal range. Brutal way to lose a game. Looks like another year in which BYU is on the cusp of being pretty good. But then just how good are they? It's a good program. Kalani Sitake's done a good job. But you got to look at kind of the consistency or lack thereof. It's been a real big problem. So how is it going to play out as we get into the rankings this week? how should it play out. Couple of things to keep in mind. Strength of schedule, let's see how much it matters. Who you've played, who you've beaten, always matters. Alabama is right now in strength of schedule number 1, followed by Texas, Tennessee, Ohio State, and Penn State. I don't think we're going to see a 3-loss team in the initial rankings. We might, but we shall see. The teams with the best chance: Texas, Mississippi State, Arkansas, which have been inside the top 15 this year in terms of schedule toughness. But Tennessee's got the best win thus far. How about Tulane? Be the highest rated Group of 5 team. They're 7-1. Bad loss to Southern Miss, but they've got the big win against Kansas State. I think they control its path to go to the Cotton Bowl. Now, I can't tell you how big a Tulane season would be if it ended up in the Cotton Bowl. Phenomenal. Look, they've still got some work to do in the American. I still thought Cincinnati was a little bit better. They certainly had a bad week last week. Tulane still got to beat them. Long way to go, but we'll have to see how this plays out. What is going to happen with Clemson in the early rankings? Because you know what's going to happen. People are going to overreact to the first ranking. Is Clemson going to be ranked because of their reputation and their record and be in the top 4? Or will they likely be ranked outside of the top 4 in favor of teams, say, from the Big Ten or the SEC, or maybe even a Pac-12 team that have played a tougher schedule? My thinking is that Clemson will be outside looking in now, but if they win out unbeaten conference champion, which they're not unbeaten, they're not a conference champion yet, that's where they'll move up. They've got the easiest path to at least win the conference championship, and I think an unbeaten Clemson probably gets in. Injuries, how much that will be taken into account. It's always been a factor. How is that going to affect Kansas State? 2-loss Kansas State. The only Big 12 losses this season came at an unbeaten TC on the road a couple of weeks ago without Adrian Martinez, who exited the game during the first series and didn't return. Played the rest of the way. You're looking at a different team atop the conference standings through 9 weeks. What's the path for a 2-loss team? No 2-loss team has ever made it to the college football playoffs. Is it possible? I think the one team we have to look out for, and it's going to be very difficult, but if LSU is able to win out against Alabama, win out the rest of their schedule, and then win the SEC championship game, then I think they would be in contention. Kansas State could be a factor if they were to win out, but SEC champion, 2-loss SEC champion will get in. LSU would get in. The Florida State game was a long time ago. I think they look at them being a little bit different. Alabama, still in good position in terms of the playoffs, even though don't know what type of position they are as a team. They've got a lot of work to do to finish out the season. But there's no question that there's a lot of respect for the talent and what they've done in the past, and we'll kind of see. Pac-12, how are they going to be looked at? Will their losses be magnified? Who's a really great team? Oregon, no doubt, is playing better. I have no doubt if they played Georgia this week, it would be closer. But they didn't. They played them when they played them, and they lost big. That's going to hurt the Pac-12 because the best-looking team in the league is Oregon. And even though they're better than they were when they played Georgia, that is still a beatdown that they're not going to have a hard time overcoming. And then where's the 2 best Big Ten teams? Where does Ohio State rank? How high? Good team. I think they're, as I said earlier, maybe as good as anybody in terms of their abilities to play in all aspects to beat any type of team. I think they're really good. Very good offense, explosive when they're at their best, and I think a pretty good defense. them and Georgia look to be maybe the most complete. But how will they rank? Where does Michigan rank? So what is the ranking going to be for a potential unbeaten Ohio State versus an unbeaten Michigan? Something I'm looking forward to. That'll begin to tell us tonight. And then obviously who's going to be fourth, who's going to be fifth. A lot of question marks there. There's going to be a lot of bitching and complaining. There's no doubt about that. There always is. This is going to be always a concern and a frustration amongst fans. Couple of things to keep in mind. Want to talk about the Michigan State, Michigan. I'm not going to get into a whole lot of, because you already know, you've seen the video. Look, there's something that needs to be done. The Michigan State rivalries there are a lot of ugly rivals. There are a lot of bitterness and all of that. That's one thing. When you get into the assault level, when you get into the hijack level, when you do things, look, the stomping on the emblem in the middle of the field is childish. The breaking up the hand holding, arm locking is childish. It's chippy. But what you saw there is probably criminal. I'll let the criminologists determine that. But that type of stuff needs to be handled in a way that never happens again. And I don't want to hear the crap about, well, they should not have the same tunnel. Look, how about just not acting like thugs? Maybe we do that. No need to change the facility or how do you do it. It's not ideal. It ain't the only one that's not ideal. Don't act like a thug. Michigan State looks really bad in that moment. And I know Mel Tucker's taken some moves, but I think that is a reflection on him. Gets paid a lot of money now. A lot of money. Probably more than his resume would suggest, but really tough look. Hey, this week, obviously, we're going to get in heavy to Tennessee, Georgia. And the matchups. What is Georgia going to do differently than Alabama did against Tennessee? What do you have to do? You have to get pressure. You have to crash the mesh point of Hendon Hooker in this Tennessee offense. You've got to do that. If you don't, it's going to be difficult. You've got to do that. You've got to be able to defend the run with minimum guys in the box. The defensive line has to play very well. You have to control the run game so that your secondary and your backers can play this in man coverage with some help and focus on the deep ball and the underneath ball. If you have to commit more guys to the run, if you have to bite and cheat up against the run like Alabama had to do or felt they needed to do, you're going to have a hard time. You're going to absolutely have a hard time. That's the premier game. Alabama, LSU, going to have a lot to talk about in that game as well. This LSU team's playing better. Alabama has to go there, play LSU at night. Alabama has not played with a lot of discipline on the road this year. What is the bye week done and meant for both of these teams? How much better are they going to be? Very interested in watching that as well. Just some final thoughts out the door. Kind of looking at the players of the week this week. It ended up being Marvin Harrison and JTT for me. One other thing just out the door. I don't know how other people are going to vote the top, but inside the film room, I think Ohio State and Georgia are still the most complete teams. I think Tennessee, I think Michigan is a little bit better than Clemson at this point, but I am curious to see what Alabama does this week, how much improved they are, if they are. That's kind of how I see it at this point. Tennessee, for the folks that have written in and have asked me to address this, can Tennessee lose this game and be a one-loss team that doesn't go into the SEC championship game and still get in? They can't. If they play Georgia well, Georgia ends up winning the SEC championship game. Now, remember, They can't have Alabama beat Georgia. For the Tennessee fans that think, well, we beat Alabama. Folks, you can't use head-to-head in a 3-team scenario unless one team has either beaten the other two or lost to the other two. So if Alabama beats Georgia in the SEC championship game, they're going and Georgia's going. Because Alabama's won the SEC championship and beat Georgia. Tennessee, if you didn't beat Georgia, you're not going to get ahead of Georgia or Alabama. So you're going to need that. And you're not going to see 3 SEC teams. I just don't see a scenario. It would have to be chaotic to where there was no other choice. They're not going to put 3 in. But if Georgia were to beat Alabama, then even though Alabama made the SEC championship, Georgia would be the second SEC team. Now, can 2 teams from the Big Ten get in? Yes, they can. The loser of Michigan, Ohio State, I think needs to be competitive. And obviously, with Ohio State, let's just say Ohio State beats Michigan and Ohio State wins out. I think you could see Ohio State and Michigan get in. But you also have to compare the second team of the Big Ten with a potential second team in the SEC, along with Clemson, an unbeaten Clemson, an unbeaten TCU. I don't think you can keep an unbeaten you won't keep an unbeaten TCU team out and an unbeaten Clemson team out, in my view. I think those teams get in, and that would trump a second-place SEC team or Big Ten team, because you've got those 2 champions would get in, and then you would see Clemson and TCU. I think that's how it would play out, particularly TCU's strength of schedule being what it is. They don't look like a complete one of the 4 best teams on film, but the resume is pretty good. They look a lot like Tennessee looks, although Tennessee's been more decisive in their wins against a good schedule. A lot of football left, but that's some initial thoughts. And folks, reminder, as you're watching the rankings unveiled, Maction is back. Folks, we've got football every day from now through we get to Thanksgiving. Maction is back. Buffalo and Ohio is an important matchup in the MAC East, so watch that as well. Hey, a reminder to check out our good friends at the Big Game College Football Streaming Network, where you can get the Scout's Eye and College Football Show. Also, check out the Landry Football Podcast Network. You can catch this show on the Landry Football YouTube channel as well, live as we do it. But check out the Landry Football Podcast Network, where you can get this show, all the shows that we've got for you on the Landry Football Podcast Network. All the NFL, all the college shows, we got it for you, breaking it down. Appreciate you joining us. We'll take a look at all the matchups later this week on Scout's Eye on College Football. We'll have the breakdowns with each conference game, each conference show that we've got for you. SEC football and beyond, Big Ten football and beyond, so on and so forth. We've got all of that for you as well. All of the NFL shows right here on the Landry Football Podcast Network. Check us out, subscribe, like, and share that if you would. Appreciate you. Talk to you next time, everybody.